In a lot of my work, I bring out the wounded Palestine, the trauma that is very important to address, but also the magnificence of what an oppressed people are being asked to suppress. I want the work to be monumental because the Palestinian voice has to be monumental. I was born and raised in Bethlehem, which is in Palestine in the West Bank. I grew up under direct Israeli military rule, and we were under apartheid. And apartheid is not a word that you just throw around that means nothing. It means that one group of people is treated as second-class citizen, if that at all even. So what we've been seeing recently is really a continuation to what Israel has been doing since 1948, since the establishment of the Israeli state. And it is something that I always thought it was almost my duty and urgency for me to talk about, because it is unfathomable that this is still going on in the 21st century. For me, it's very difficult to even define myself without understanding my political background. I mean, as a Palestinian, I think specifically it's extremely hard because your nationality drives your understanding or your positioning in the world, as well as your limitations in that world. So how can you really separate your personal journey from the politics around you? So it's very difficult to talk about one without talking about the other. One of the pieces that you see here is called Tank, and it was one of the first pieces that I started working on using film. And that shows a group of peace activists who tried to stop an Israeli tank. So that was how I started working. And I think my work developed in a way where I actually kind of did not want to always account for what was going on. I wanted to create my own world by using tools that were available to a certain realm of people. If you think about Hollywood and the amount of influence it has on the world, how we understand America is very much through film. But I understood that the world did not know anything about me. So in that sense, I felt that it is my right as a citizen of the world to also use the same tools and in a way also hijack tools that were reserved to, say, white men in Hollywood. Like when you talk about sci-fi, you don't think a Palestinian woman would be working with that, and that for precisely the reason why I wanted to start working with that. I think with Space Exodus, it was the first time that I worked with a higher budget than I worked before. And the idea with the work was to, position a Palestinian on the moon. So I was the first Palestinian to land on the moon and kind of paraphrase the American moon landing. But in a way, when you do this and you shift the context, you immediately start thinking there's something wrong with the scenario, because we're so used to thinking that America's landing on the moon is really done in the name of progress for all humanity. But when you see a Palestinian planting a flag on the moon, you start really thinking that there is something strange about this picture. But I kind of question then, who has the right to do this? I think working with science fiction gives me the freedom to create my own worlds where I can set my own vernacular. When reality becomes stranger than fiction, it just made it easier to just move into fiction. And sci-fi has this ability to talk about temporality in a way that regular documentary can't. Nation State was more of a kind of direct commentary of what was happening in Bethlehem. I made it around the time when the Israeli settlement started growing so fast, and the Israeli government built the apartheid wall that was kind of like circling Bethlehem from one side, and then the Israeli settlements were circling it from the other side. And it just became so suffocating on both sides of Bethlehem, so kind of like an attack from both sides. And you felt that you're almost turning into an open air prison, because if you want to leave Bethlehem, you have to go through Israeli checkpoints. My own family lost land where settler roads were built on. And once they do that, they need to have a buffer zone, and therefore have all land, and there's no accountability internationally of what they're doing. So for me, I started asking what would a viable Palestinian state look like, because with all of this happening and all the land grab, we were still talking about a two-state solution. Yet, what does the state look like? And what was happening in Bethlehem was happening in all other cities in Palestine. So how do you imagine the Palestinian state to look like? And a nation-state became an ironic take on what that would look like. And I imagined it as something that doesn't take too much space, that is houses the entire Palestinian territory in one high skyscraper that's so high-tech and comfortable. You don't have to go through checkpoints. You can go from one city to another by way of an elevator. In the Palestinian predicament, the trauma is intertwined with Palestinian identity. It's very hard to separate Palestinian identity from that trauma. And a hope for a change in the future. And in that sense, I think it's very difficult to understand Palestinian identity without the struggle. It's almost like when you take that struggle out, I don't know what Palestinian identity would become. It almost has become part of that. And in a lot of my work, I address this particular aspect of it. Themes like trauma, for example, are very hard to really kind of capture in just precise words. One of the examples in the exhibition is the big sphere that you see in one of the spaces. It's a huge black sphere, almost 6 meters high. And it becomes a signifier for nothing. And in a way, it's very difficult to find the words to talk about referencing nothingness. And how can you make something so huge to talk about nothing? It's always interesting to see how the work shifts with time. When we did in Vitro, for example, in 2019, it was at a time where we thought that politically what was happening in Palestine was going to such a dramatic point that an apocalypse is going to happen if it continues to go like this. And so that was the reason why we made that film. Now this apocalypse is actually happening. So in a way, it feels like it's more of a commentary on that. In one of the rooms, you see from the remains of those we lost, which contains capsules that are hanging from the ceiling, and they are part of a cloning farm. And this cloning farm references the room next to it, which has in vitro. So this cloning farm is a way of continuing after a disaster. And I think you see it in this exhibition in a way where you see a connection between in vitro that envisions this apocalypse that happened, and then the opera where you see a woman mourning the loss that are counted, but also she says she mourns the loss of those that are still to come. And to comment on this trauma that stays with you, that's embedded in your DNA. There's a lot of research showing that children of people who have experienced trauma carry that trauma within them, in their DNA. So it situates it in a way that I think is very relevant politically right now, but also asks the question of trauma, epigenetics, and how do we go on, future generations. I think there's something inherent in art, and that makes it so malleable as a form, where new ways of talking about the world is possible. And I think without it, it's very difficult to talk about the intricacies of certain predicaments. So I think it's very important to insist on that space. In a sense, I think the first thing that goes through in times of war is culture, because you think that, well, people are dying and therefore we need to invest money into ambulances and food, and which is absolutely understandable. But at the same time, what war does to a people is that it robs them of that space of imagination, which is also incredibly an underprivileged place. So I think insisting on the fact that you have art is actually saying that I insist on my right for imagination. And I think that's very important.